Thank you for joining us today. We'll be covering selling your lawn care company, 7 things that you should know. I am Rob McCoy with Holganix. Today I have Barrett Ersek with me. We are happy that you took time out of your busy day to join us, and we're going to try and make it worth your while. There our beautiful pictures are. Barrett, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Barrett Ersek, founder, CEO of Holganix. Before starting Holganix, I built and sold 2 lawn care companies. Sold one to Scott's when they were doing their roll-up back in the early part of the 2000s, and then sold the next one to KKR, private equity group that was doing roll-ups associated with ServiceMaster at the time, True Green Chem Lawn. And so had experience in selling lawn care companies. Also, throughout my career, I've bought about a dozen smaller lawn care companies as I ran those other businesses. So have experience on both sides of the buy and sell side of the equation.
Yeah, and I'm Rob McCoy, National Sales Manager for Holganix. And for a lot of that, I was along that ride with Barrett, and also have had the opportunity to work with a lot of customers that have been at this stage where they're curious as to, how do I even go about this? Or they're thinking about acquiring one of the other companies within their area to create more density. And there's always been a number of different questions about it, and we're going to try and cover some of the main points so that you know what direction to take. So on our agenda today, we're going to be going over valuation, the deal, types of buyers, culture fit, getting ready to sell, life cycle of the deal, and who to consult. So Barrett, what can you've been through this valuation process, and it's kind of different every time, but what can you talk about as far as some of the highlights of the valuation?
Yeah, so it can vary widely. A lot of people think about multiples of EBITDA. EBITDA is earnings before interest, taxes, and amortization. And that's how private companies are typically sold, some multiple of EBITDA, 5 times EBITDA, 10 times EBITDA, 7 times EBITDA. You'll hear private companies sell for those types of numbers. In lawn care, they can be bought on a multiple of EBITDA, but often they just look at a multiple of top line of revenue because most of your bigger buyers are sophisticated enough that they can understand if they look at your price list, how much you're charging per 1,000 square feet, they can they can build their own P&L out. And your P&L is not all that relevant. So whether you have EBITDA or don't have EBITDA, whether you expense things that, maybe some people wouldn't expense to drive down your income, it's sort of irrelevant in most lawn care sales because you can pretty much value a business on a multiple of top line of revenue, and the profit and loss is not all that relevant. They may want to look at the profit and loss just to verify some things, but ultimately valuations are often talked about on a multiple of revenue. If I go down to the bottom of this, these bullet points, your typical revenues or your typical multiples, everybody kind of hears about this dollar on a dollar of revenue. And that's a pretty common deal and has been pretty standard for a number of years. Every once in a while, it gets hard to get that dollar on dollar revenue. And every once in a while, there's deals that are had that could be, higher than that. And it just depends on how many buyers are in the phase of rolling up smaller companies. And it depends on, things like interest rates and other things as well. If you look at the size of the company, if you're selling a small company, let's say you're doing 200,000 in revenue, 300,000 in revenue, 500,000 in revenue, nice companies that, owner operator can make a nice living on, but they're not going to be valued as much to a buyer as a company that's doing, $1 million or $3 million. Because at the end of the day, it's just as hard to kind of go through the purchase of a $300,000 company as it is to go through the purchase of a $3 million company. So all the transaction costs, all of the merger costs, all of the kind of people costs that go into merging the 2 companies, you're going to get a discounted valuation on a company that's less than $1 million. I would be surprised if you could get a dollar on dollar revenue for a company that's doing under $1 million. Certainly from that 1 to 3 million, a dollar on dollar revenue is very achievable. You may have heard some stories recently that the companies went for much higher than that. There was some aggressive acquisitions happening. Interest rates were very low. Private equity got involved, and we did see some inflated numbers. those days I think are kind of behind us now that things are settling out and interest rates continue to get higher. It makes it harder to finance these things. And so the prices, you're going to see them come back down to where we've historically been. Now, if you have a significant company, 5 million, 10 million, 15 million, now you've got something that could look to be a platform company. It's a much bigger acquisition. You could see numbers there over $1 revenue and could be quite a bit more. But it just really depends on a lot of things. Top line revenue and how much revenue you have, that's certainly a piece of the puzzle. Your growth rate. So are you growing every year, or are you or is your net customer count going down every year? They're also going to look at your cancel rate. Even if you're growing, but you have, let's just say, a 35, 40% cancel rate, it doesn't seem like you have a very stable customer base. So they're going to discount that. If you can keep your cancels at 20% or better, so 15%, 10%, 17%, anywhere in that range, you're going to be looked upon as a well-run organization that has a more stable customer base. So bottom line is, if we can keep the company growing throughout the kind of the idea that you might want to sell your business, it's good to keep the foot on the accelerator and show growth, and it's good to keep your customer service up, and so your cancels don't dip, because that will discount your price. They're also going to want to look at, what do you charge per 1,000 square feet? Are you the cheapest guy in town? Well, you're not going to get as much money as if you're a more of a premium price, because that's going to affect profit margin for the buyer. The more customers you have, the more attractive it's going to be. The new customers, if you added a whole bunch of new customers recently, you may be discounted on that, because it's seen that new customers are not as stable as customers who've been with you for a couple of years. So if it looks like you just added a whole bunch of customers, beware that may not be a great sign, because it looks like you got a bunch of customers that may or may not stick with you. Again, the bigger the company, the more your valuation is going to be, not just on a dollar basis, but on a multiple of dollars.
And do you think density has anything to do with that when you're talking about the size of the company, that it's just making a bigger dent in a geography that they're potentially already in?
Yeah, that's a good point, Rob. So density is going to have an impact in two different ways. One is, let's just say they're buying your geography as a new geography that they're going to start to service. Maybe this new lawn care company just wants to come into the city and start with your company as their initial launch. They're going to want your density to be high, because at the end of the day, windshield time is the enemy of profit, and density is going to drive profit margin. So if they can see that you've got really tight routes, really good density, you're going to definitely get a favorable valuation. There's another way to look at it too, which is if you're selling to a company that's already got a local presence, even if your density isn't awesome, but your density, if your customer base and your geography falls right on top of their existing customer base and geography, you're going to have the impact of really expanding their density. Then that's going to be another way to use density to drive valuation.
And I would say on a local level, there's one other aspect, and that is, are you a threat? If you are continuously taking customers from a larger company in your area, you will be put on their radar, and the more of a threat you are to their density, the more they're going to try and aggressively pursue that purchase.
Yeah, often the companies also want to, the companies that are doing the purchasing these days, labor is so tough to find. If you've got a really good group of technicians that have been with you for a while, they're well trained, that's going to be a plus as well, and an asset.
So if you're thinking back to when you were actually going through this, obviously there's a lot of parts to the deal and how that works. What were some of the highlights? What were some of the most difficult points to navigate? Yeah,
so I'll tell you what was funny. The first company I sold, I was still in my 20s. I wasn't very sophisticated, hadn't been through the process before, and had a nice little, $2.5 million company that I built, through my early 20s. It was a nice company. It wasn't, the biggest company in town or anything, but, it was profitable. It had good density. And Scott's kept knocking on my door asking me if I wanted to sell a company. And I kept saying no, because I was happy running my company. I was making a nice living. I didn't want to sell it. It wasn't part of my radar screen. And they just kept asking me. Then one time the guy says to me, he says, look, everybody's got a price. You name your price. Maybe I can get it. Maybe I can't get it. But give me a price. Worst case scenario is we say we can't do it, but what if we can? We really want your business. And they made me feel like I was special. My company was special. And So I said, okay, look, so, I was $2.5 million business. I said, if you can get me $10 million, I'd sell the company, because I thought, yeah, there's no way they're going to give me $10 million. Guy comes back. He said, well, I don't know. I've never seen a deal like that, but I'll see. I'll throw it out there, see if they really want it. And then he comes back to me, a week later, and he says, hey, listen, you're not going to believe this, but I got you a $10 million offer. I'm like, really? You're going to give me $10 million for this $2.5 million? I've never heard of such a thing. He says, that's right. I said, okay, great. Put it in a term sheet. Let me see it. And so he waits another week to give me a term sheet. Meantime, my wife and I are buying a boat and planning our vacation, and what's my next business going to be. And he gives me a term sheet with a $10 million price. Of course, it had a 20-year payout. So he was going to pay me out over 20 years with a bunch of caveats as to whether this happened or that happened, as to whether I was actually going to get the $10 million out over 20 years. Well, of course I wasn't going to take a 20-year payout, and he didn't think I was going to take a 20-year payout. But here's what he did get. He got me engaged, because then I said, well, that's ridiculous. I thought this was going to be a cash offer. I didn't think it was going to be a 20-year term. He says, well, look, there's two things that are negotiable: price and terms. You got to name the price. We get to name the terms. He said, if you don't like those terms, it's no problem. We can negotiate terms, but of course, price is going to be negotiated at the same time. So it was a pretty interesting way to get me to the table and get me to start talking. And then we went back and forth and ended up getting, a fair deal. Felt good about the sale, but it was nowhere near that $10 million. It was about a third of that. And so at the end of the day, two things are negotiable: price and terms. And so just be aware of which is more important to you, the top price, or whether you're willing to take terms. You might get a higher price if you're willing to finance the purchase out over 3 or 4 or 5 years. If you want all cash up front, you may have to take a smaller price. So you may hear people sell their companies for a big multiple, but beware, they may not have actually gotten all that money up front. They may have gotten a big multiple, but out over 4 or 5 years. And that's a much different purchase than getting all cash up front. So those two things are definitely factors to consider. The other thing is when they buy your company, they can do it as an asset sale, where they just basically buy your customer list and possibly your trucks and things like that. Or they can do a stock sale where they actually buy your company. It's almost always advantageous to the buyer to do an asset sale. And so typically you're going to see it as an asset sale. The buyer is going to want that and not an actual stock sale. But every once in a while you do see a stock sale. Stock sales can actually be more advantageous tax-wise for the seller. But the asset sale is going to be much more advantageous to the buyer on most situations. But you want to be aware of which one it is and understand the tax consequences. And again, that structured payout is often brought up and should be considered. Keep in mind, they often have caveats on to whether or not you're going to get paid on the second payment, third payment, fourth payment, which might be on retention rates and how well the customer base performs, things that could be out of your control if they don't do a good job. And that goes to your holdback on retention rates there on that bullet point. And the other thing you got to think about what you're selling is there's multiple assets here. One is the customer list, which they often give you a value for the customer list. Then you got to look at your trucks and equipment and what that might be worth, and that's a separate valuation. As I mentioned, employees. If you've got a good list of employees that have good pedigrees and been with you for a while, you may be able to get a little bonus for that, or you may be able to negotiate pay increases for your employees for going along with the deal. And that's something you could do as a favorable thing for your employees. And then lastly, you look at your accounts receivable. Sometimes they'll buy your accounts receivable from you, typically at a discount. So let's just say you have, $200,000 in accounts receivable that people owe you. They'll look at your 30, 60, 90-day aging, and they'll give you, let's say 90 cents for your 30-day aging. They'll give you 80 cents on your 60-day aging. And they may only give you 40 cents on 90-day aging because those people aren't going to pay at a very high rate. So just keep in mind the AR is an asset, but often it's a discounted asset depending on how old it is. And so these are all things to think about when you're valuing your company.
And if I remember correctly, when we were dealing with ServiceMaster, the possibility of revenue being held back based on retention rates was like a really high concern. Can you give an example of how they possibly structured that?
Yeah, so I'll tell you, point blank, what they did is they held back, I believe it was 12% of the purchase price, or I forget what the percentage was, but they held back, more than $1 million on a purchase price, and that $1 million was a reserve for them, and I had to deliver, I believe it was 80% retention on customers. after 60 days, after they received their first application from TruGreen or ServiceMaster. So they had to get one application by the new company and not cancel. And then if we did that, then we were going to get all of our holdback, the reserve money back. Seemed like a reasonable thing. I knew my customers were solid. I knew that, you know, even if TruGreen didn't do a good job, it would take them longer than one application to cancel. What I totally underestimated was the fact that TruGreen totally botched the merger. They couldn't import my database into their database. They had some computer problem. They did it manually from India, and it took months for them to input all the data, and they inputted it wrong. And in the meantime, we sold the company at the end of the summer, so customers are expecting to get their next round. They didn't even get their next round for 90 days. So customers that were expecting an application never got their full application, their early full application, and because they couldn't do the merger. In the meantime, then TruGreen shows up and does like 2 applications at once, tries to catch up. They didn't return anybody's phone calls. They didn't do anything to try to save those customers. And so as a result, they had like, I don't know what the number was, but let's just say 35% cancel rate. And I was projecting 20 or better to get my holdback. Well, at the end of the day, they didn't pay me that last payment. And they argued that their cancel rate was lower than what I agreed to give them a holdback on. And my argument was, yeah, but you guys didn't even try to service the lawns. I mean, you didn't even make an attempt. And anyway, at the end of the day, they're a bigger company with better lawyers, and I lost that money. So,
you know, it's interesting with both of those examples, we kind of go through 2 very different types of buyers. And you've hit on this already, but why don't you just kind of summarize, you know, what people could be looking out for?
Yeah, so there's different kinds of buyers, and you got to think about what buyer makes the most sense for your company, your organization, your employees, your customers. There's a couple of private equity groups that have entered the lawn care space in the last couple of years, and they've started to roll up some of the medium-sized, you know, $10 million kind of players. And I'm sure that if you're keeping your ear to the street, you've heard about some of these deals. Those private equity groups are looking to now take those. They made some pretty aggressive acquisitions at pretty high valuations that you may have heard. They're now looking to use those companies as platform companies, and now they're going to go do more normal acquisitions to bolt on to those platform acquisitions that they made. So don't believe that you're going to get those big high valuations. That was a very unusual moment in time. Interest rates were right. A couple of private equity groups entered the market at the same time, and they were bidding up for a couple of platform companies that there was only a few available that you know, so supply and demand. So there may be some opportunity to join those roll-ups. Typically, that's going to be you know, more of an institutional feel. You're not going to your customers and your employees aren't going to get that same feel that they're used to getting from you and working with you. So it's something to consider. And the same thing when you look at like a TruGreen, they're the classic, you know, TruGreen's always a buyer at some price. And, you know, selling to TruGreen has its pros and cons. You know, I guess the pros are they're fairly well funded, and you can usually get a big chunk of cash up front. Cons are, depending on which market it is, what the management looks like, you may or may not get great service, and your employees may or may not be happy where they're at. In some cases, I still have a few employees that I sold to ServiceMaster more than 13 years ago that are still with ServiceMaster and making a nice living, and a whole bunch didn't stay very long. So, you know, you just got to think that through. Really, if you can find the best, in my opinion, the best mergers are when you can find a good local competitor that's got a really good reputation, that takes care of their people, takes care of their customers, and culturally it looks a lot more like your company, assuming you're a local company as well. And if you can find a merger like that, and a you know, more sophisticated operator that's willing to give you a decent dollar, but also take care of your people and your customers, that's sometimes the best way to feel like your legacy continues to go on in a positive way. And you may not care. You may just want to take your money and run, and in which case go with your best deal. But it is something to consider.
Yeah, something you had hit on was the cultural fit. You know, and is the buyer a cultural fit? How do you analyze, you know, whether there's a fit there?
Yeah, so I mean, it goes with what, you know, basically what I was just talking about. You know, there's private equity groups, the TruGreens. You got to think about, is that a cultural fit? Probably not. most of the local independents have been operating as the anti-True Green. So it's hard to kind of roll up to the person you've been competing against, viciously. And you may not feel that way, in which case they may be a good fit. You may want more of a corporate opportunity for your employees. If that's the case, that's great. But I think if you look at some of the local, if you can find a good local buyer that's running a very good company that takes care of their people, that's, in most cases, most of our regional, independent lawn care companies, they're going to do better culturally when they merge into a company like that. That's a local company that's has a similar feels as what your company looks like. And the best opportunity is when you can merge into a bigger company that's maybe better organized, better funded than yours. Now you've just given your employees and your customers maybe even a better opportunity than what they could have had with you, and still maintain that family feel. And I've seen some of those mergers happen, and they typically work out very well.
This is not really in this segment, but have you seen situations where the company owner has actually moved over and become part of that new company in the merger?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So it's not common. Most of the time, the owners are going to stick around for 90 days to help the merger happen, and then kind of disappear into the sunset. But there are definitely times where the owners stick around and become part of the management of the new company, and that can happen when it's a local merger, when you're joining another organization. They're looking for leaders, and so you can take your cash off the table as an owner, and then continue to get paid a nice salary as a leader of this new organization that's growing. They will often be happy to have you because you've got a lot of intimate knowledge of the industry, of the employees, and you'll be a big resource for them to help them grow. It can also be an opportunity if you join into a private equity group, because they're also looking for leaders as they continue to grow their businesses. If you look at merging into a True Green or that type, the owners typically don't fit very well because it's such a corporate structure that the entrepreneur doesn't really have a home there, is what I've seen. So they typically take your money and move on.
And I would consider that falling into the price and terms negotiation as well. And I would not think of it as a negative, but more of a positive, that you carry typically more value into that than what they're giving you as far as a price increase, or not just a payout, but a salary moving forward. You have an extreme value there if the cultural fit is there, if there's a need for it. So if you're looking for the opportunity to cash out but still have an income, there may be a lot of opportunities there.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Robin, and it's true too. I mean, when I sold my company, both times I started another company up within 6 months for a couple of reasons. One is I wasn't young enough to retire, and even though the money sounds like it's a lot of money when you're getting it, it's not enough to last compared to running your business and getting paid a regular salary. So it is a nice opportunity if you have a way to land on your feet and have income right off the bat.
So for the companies and entrepreneurs that are getting ready to sell, how do they, what steps can they take now to make sure that they're positioning themselves to, possibly get the dollar on the dollar, or increase every penny on the dollar that they can?
Yeah. So even if you were going to sell the company, let's just say you knew you were going to sell it, but not anytime soon, maybe I'm going to sell 3 years from now, 5 years from now, you're going to get the most value for the company if you start planning for that now. The more you can plan and stage your company to sell, the better. It's just like selling a house. If you sell your house as is, you're going to get less money than if you sell your house after you spruce it up, clean it up, paint it, make sure it's in perfect condition. So what do you got to do to get your house in order to sell your company? Well, make sure that you have really good data. You got to have a solid customer list that's organized, and it's you have your cancels and your prospects and your estimates that you've done that haven't turned into customers. The richer that database is with names of people and information and pricing and conversations, the more valuable it's going to be to your buyer. And again, you want to keep your cancel rates low. You want to keep your customers, your overall customer base in a positive growth momentum with low cancel rates. That's going to help you, get the best value. And you want to have as much recurring revenue as possible, and you want to keep your customers seasoned, so that they're not all just a bunch of new customers, but you got customers who've been there for a long time. You need to make sure if your price list is a little bit on the low side, if let's say you're going to sell in 3 years, it would make sense to start doing some small price increases to get back in line with the market. You don't want to do such a rapid price increase that you lose customers, but you do want to be in market. You want to be the cheapest guy in town because you will get discounted. And keep in mind, every dollar you add in revenue is going to be an additional dollar of, in your multiple equation when you go get your price. So A, you're going to get a higher value. B, you're going to get more dollars. And if you have a bunch of special sales, the more you can turn them into recurring sales, the better. So let's just say you sell a grub control as an add-on to a customer, on a one-off. If you can convince that customer, or even just make it as part of your sales approach, that hey, we just do them every year. We sell you grub control this year. We're gonna do it again next year, unless you cancel. Don't make it a one-time special, but you make it a recurring revenue item. You'll get a higher value for those specials. And again, the financials, if in some cases an EBITDA is going to be a valuation tool, in which case you want to have a really clean P&L. But most buyers are sophisticated enough to pick through your P&L and just value it on a price per 1,000 square foot and the other avenues that we've talked about. I think the worst thing you can do is say, I'm going to sell my company, and so you start cutting corners, you start using cheaper fertilizer, you don't replace trucks, you don't invest in your people, and then maybe you sell it, maybe you don't. But at the end of the day, you're going to make your business more fragile. And so the best way to sell your company is to run it like you're going to keep it forever up until the day the check clears the bank, for two reasons. One is you'll have a much better company with a higher valuation, but two is you always have the ability to walk away and not sell the company because your company will be solid.
Yep. Right. That last point is really the best piece of advice in there. If you make sure that you're growing and you're running it like you're going to keep it forever, it seems to make the whole thing easier. It pulls on the heartstrings a little bit more.
Yeah.
But it definitely will provide the best return on investment. So we've been going through a lot of how to position yourself and things to look out for, how to, prepare the company, but how do you prepare yourself?
Yeah. So, what's the life cycle of a deal? How's it happen? Often you'll have a broker or somebody that's representing a buyer that reaches out to you. A lot of you have probably seen letters that you get on a quarterly basis from different brokers that are trying to find deals. They usually get a commission if they bring the deal to the buyer. The buyer's, hired them to go find deals, and then as they go get deals, they get commissions. So, you'll hear aggressive brokers, they'll promise you the world in order to get a deal done. Doesn't mean you're going to get it all, but they're going to try to get you to the table, just like my guy did with the $10 million price and a 20-year payout. Once you start getting a broker, they'll give you a soft verbal offer just to kind of get you interested. And then they're going to ask you for some high level metrics, your revenues, your customer number, your number of customers. They're going to know that you're not going to want to share your customer list because that's what you're selling, right? So you don't want to give them your names and addresses, but you can tell them I have 5,000 customers that are doing $2 million or whatever it is. Then they're going to give you a non-binding term sheet typically, which just lays out the deal points, and that's where the lawyers go to work from that term sheet. And then usually you'll have an attorney, they'll have an attorney, and they go back and forth and negotiate. And then they come in and do their due diligence. The due diligence is going to be coming in, kind of checking out the business, looking at the equipment, looking at the customer base in more detail, and really kind of looking under the hood. Keep in mind, you may think the brokers will tell you it'll happen in 60 days or 90 days. In my experience, it could take as much as 6 months to close a deal. It never happens like you think it's going to happen. So just be prepared for that. They may happen quicker than 6 months, but I think you should always plan for like a 6-month close and, don't get too anxious. It's a long, tough process. It's one of the hardest things I've ever done. A lot of paperwork, a lot of stuff. But just take your time and get it right. Don't rush a deal. That's where you're going to lose some money.
And who do you think is, you got to build a team to see your way through this because it is a long process and it's difficult. So who would you make sure that you had in play?
Yeah. So first of all, it's a very emotional. So you want to really be away from the, after you kind of agree on a basic high level stuff, you want to remove yourself from the process as much as possible and surround yourself with a team of professionals. Because it's very emotional. So you're going to make knee-jerk emotional decisions. You're not going to be the best negotiator. You also probably haven't sold a company before. So you want to surround yourself with people who have. You certainly want to get your accountant involved. He's going to need to help you with your finances and make sure that the financial projections that you give the buyers are good, and get your taxes in order, and that type of thing. You want to really consider the tax consequences. I think a lot of times people hear, oh, I'm going to get $2 million. That's awesome. You don't realize you may have to pay 40% of that in taxes. So it's not always going to be 40% because there's different ways to expense things and reduce your taxable income, but it could be a significant tax bill that you're not contemplating, and it really reduces the overall money you get to keep. So make sure you get your accountant involved and that you have a strategy for that. You also want to get obviously a good attorney that can negotiate with the other side's attorney. They can charge you hourly, which they usually will come. That'll be their first option, and they may not offer you a fixed cost. But if you asked for a fixed rate to do the deal, they will usually give you one, and that will be in your best interest typically, because if an attorney charges hourly, their main goal is to generate hours. So the longer and more complicated they make the deal, the longer it takes, the more money they get paid. And if both attorneys are getting paid hourly, then they're basically working together to increase both sides' bill. If you do a fixed rate deal where it says, hey, for $20,000 or $50,000, depending on how complicated the deal is, we're gonna execute this thing. Their motivation is going to be to keep the deal simple and get it to close quickly, because they're actually going to make more money. So your interests are typically better aligned if you can negotiate a fixed price, and that's normal. Attorneys are used to hearing that. They don't always offer that right up front. And you want to have a wealth manager. There's somebody, you've probably never had this much money in your hands at one time. And you want to make sure that you have somebody that can help you put it to good work. You've been building a company with your, your time has been put to the table to earn that money. So man at work is how I like to refer to it. Now you're entering another stage in your life where you're going to have a pile of money that could potentially work for you, money at work. And so you want to have a good wealth manager that can help you understand how to do that. Now they can also help you be more tax efficient. You want to consider, if you have shareholders, you want to basically make sure that they are aware of what's happening and that they're on board. And you may have some stock that you've awarded to employees or others, and with vesting schedules. So make sure that you're fully aware of what all of that looks like. And it's always good to have some peers that have sold the business before that can help guide you through the process. We could be a resource for you if that's something we can be helpful with. I
would say that the peer thing is actually a pretty critical component. I know that you personally relied on, friends that you had made in totally different industries that would just look at it from a different perspective. And you also mentioned that you're not going to be the best negotiator. When you're thinking through these different points, well, they also can bring a completely different perspective to it based off of their experience. And you may have a one-off for what the typical deal looks like in your industry based off of what was done in another industry, and it may make your deal a much better fit. So I wouldn't shy away from people that aren't in your industry. But there are some other options here as well. Why don't you just hit on these and we'll look and see if this is also something that the attendees can utilize.
Yeah, sure. So, what we've been talking about in this entire conversation is assuming that you have a lawn care company that basically puts down fertilizer, kills weeds, that type of thing. We're not considering that you have a maintenance company, a landscaping company, a irrigation company that also has lawn care services. So they're going to be valued much differently, because there's not a lot of purchasers that are going to buy a turnkey full service company. It's going to, you're usually going to see the companies that are going to want to buy the lawn maintenance company different than the company that maybe is going to buy the landscaping design build company. So you can always spin off business units. Don't think that you have to sell it as an overall company. I've seen a lot of people sell full service landscape companies that have a small lawn care customer base that they're not really focused on and maybe not as good at as they are at the design build. I've seen them sell their lawn care companies as a spin-off from the core company. In fact, I've bought companies that way when I had my other businesses. So that's something you can always consider. And you maybe can keep your other business and get some cash to grow it, if you're in the design build business, as an example. There are employee-owned companies, that are in the industry. They're a lot harder to sell because the ESOP, which is an employee-owned company, stands for, the ESOP is an acronym that stands for that type of a company. they're much harder to sell because you've got this fragmented ownership, and they're really not designed to sell in this manner. If you got a handful of employees who have some ownership, obviously you can get a few people around the table and get better consensus. That's going to be an easier way to do a deal. And again, know your vesting schedule. So know if you've got stock options that are awarded to employees over time, they get a certain amount of stock over a certain period of time. Make sure you calculate that so you know how much stock everybody's really going to end up with. It's typical that a acquirer will want you to work as the owner to help improve the transition and the retention. Sometimes they don't want you. When I sold my first company to Scott's, they didn't want me to come in the door next day. But I have seen a lot of deals, and the better deals, frankly, are when the owners are stay involved for at least 90 days, maybe longer. And here's the thing: the best way to get the best price is to always have at least 2 buyers. Well, even if you only have 1 buyer, remember there's always a second buyer, which is you. In other words, if you're willing to keep the company and be happy keeping the company, then you can always say no with confidence and get the price that makes the most sense. So remember, you're always a second buyer or a third buyer for that matter, especially if you run your company well and don't mind keeping it.
Okay. Well, that was awesome. We're going to open it up to some questions. And for those of you that have to hop off, we appreciate you joining us today. And if you need any assistance, or if you're looking for a peer to lean on, or someone who's been through this process, we are happy to help. You can contact us at our office or by email. So thank you again, and we'll open up